We're going to be looking at Chapter 2, Police Ethics, the nature of policing and police corruption. So with ethics and policing, there are three issues that have shaped the role of ethics within our policing. So we look at the styles of policing, the police as an institution, and we look at police culture. The original English concept of the role of police force emphasized the need for police to obtain the goodwill of citizens in performing their policing duties. When policing came to the United States, there was little concern among police officers about adhering to legal norms despite their formal policing role as enforcers of the law. During the 1930 era of reform, police began to narrow their functions to focus on crime control and the apprehension of criminals. Many observers of police work regard the primary function of police to be peacekeeping. Researchers have proposed models of policing to assist with an understanding of police function in a society. These models are considered the crime fighter, the emergency operator, the social enforcer, and the social peacekeeper. A crime fighter sees criminals as the enemy and police and the community as the good guys. The emergency operator model sees the police role as that of an emergency personnel, so an ambulance operator or a firefighter. Viewing the police as a social enforcer emphasizes coercion as the central feature of police work. In formulating the social peacekeeper model, there is argument that there is a need to adopt a broader definition of policing and advocates for police as public service rather than crime fighters because there is a concern that this could promote policing as social peacekeepers. There are four primary segments found within policing. We have our patrol officers, who make up the bulk of law enforcement units and often remain in this occupation throughout their entire police career. We have our middle manager, who will rise through the ranks through seniority in examinations. They will supervise and handle the paperwork. They will view themselves as moderating and supervising the mistakes of others, and will generally remain at this level. We then have our higher administrators. Those are usually selected by local political processes, so maybe the mayor, city council, or a specific hiring committee. And they will rarely have contact with their patrol officers, and their duties are going to involve politics as well as policing considerations. We then have the detectives and investigators, who enjoy this high status as they are higher than patrol officers, and they are the information processors who investigate, define, clear, and otherwise manage the tensions between the case. Scholars now commonly characterize police as either warriors or guardians. A police warrior concept encourages an adversarial policing type, suspicious of the public, and an attitude the public support for policing tactics, while still valued, is not required. Under the police guardian concept, this constitutes a form of community policing that is emphasizing respect for human dignity and advocates using patience to achieve peaceful solutions rather than resorting to force. Policing in the United States is highly decentralized, with almost half of all local police departments employing fewer than 10 full-time officers. Compared to other developed nations, the U.S. law enforcement training is brief. While there are state-sponsored police academies, tuition costs are generally the responsibility of the individual police recruit. On average, academies offer 21 weeks of classroom instruction, teaching basic policing skills compared to the 2 years provided in Europe at no cost to the recruit. The institution of policing has been perceived either as a profession or as a bureaucracy. The police can be seen as possessing some of the aspects of a profession, such as discretionary authority and providing a public service, but not necessarily others, such as the possession of higher education and special expertise. The importance of the distinction between a professional and a bureaucracy for the study of police ethics is that professions emphasize ethical standards in a service ideal. Police culture is the attitudes, values, and norms of an institution that are collectively described as institutional or organizational culture. Commentators have attempted to analyze aspects of the police institutional culture. It may be that occupational culture interacting with regulators, policies, law, and politics is constituted as the driving force of policing. Police culture requires that police should never hesitate to use physical or deadly force against those who deserve it. Lying and deception are considered integral parts of the police function. Loyalty is a paramount duty. Since police engage in dangerous work, it is the protection of the public, and it is considered appropriate for the police to accept gifts from the public. These values have weakened over time due to diversity within police, the power of police unions to defend individual officers, and also the rise of investigative journalism. There are three dominant characteristics within police culture. We have cynicism. So the very nature of police work leads police to conclude that the people are weak, they are corrupt, or they are dangerous. Under force, this is the use in all situations where a threat is perceived. Force is both expressive and instrumental. And finally, police are the victims. The idea that police themselves are victim of public misunderstanding and scorn, recipient of low wages, and victim of vindictive administrative that set police officers apart from other people and legitimize or rationalize a different set of rules for them. Look at changing police culture. Some scholars of policing have suggested that police culture has changed with the advent of community policing, a greater focus on service to the public, enhancement of communication and interpersonal skills, and the impact of cultural, ethnical, and gender diversifications within a police organization. The underlying view of the world of police officers has not altered because of the basic pressures that is associated with policing, as this has remained constant. Since the 1970s, the relation to the U.S. police values have basically remained unchanged. One reason for this is that police recruits are selected from a pool of applicants who are going to share these police values, and persons attracted to law enforcement as a career are the same people who have always been drawn to policing. Limiting police discretion. This is performed in duties, but police are able to exercise a high degree of discretion. They have the freedom to make decisions about how to act in a situation. Some argue that police discretion is not value-free and it is shaped by a set of values, including the noble cause morality, that is already in place when they begin their patrol work. Solutions for limiting the wide powers of police discretion include the judicial rulemaking, legislative regulation, and developing internal codes and regulations. Some police officers deliberately use their wide power of discretion and their authority to perform acts of misconduct. Most citizens support police having a wide discretion on the basis that their hands should not be tied in their role as a guardian of the public. Three strategies that might regulate police discretion in relation to stop and frisk and associated police actions are placing legal limits on police officer discretion so that there is an internally generated list of circumstances in which stop and frisk would be permitted. We must increase police visibility through technology solutions such as body-worn cameras, citizen journalism who will video the police incidents, or institutional procedural justice processes that are characterized as being transparent, fair, and equitable treatment and are respectful for all individuals. With discretion and accountability, many argue that if police are permitted wide discretion, a high level of accountability should match so that processes and machinery exist to investigate these complaints of misconduct or abuse of discretion. Discretion can create randomness in patrol practices that make it difficult for administrators to enforce accountability. There is a distinction between decisions about scope and decisions about interpretation in exercising discretion. In the former, police must decide whether a given situation requires them to act, and in the latter, questions of definition arise. Police must also consider questions of priority and make tactical decisions to bear on police attitudes. What is the relationship between ethics and code of ethics? So statements of values and ethical standards tend to be briefer and more general than codes, with the latter detailing what kinds of acts may be performed. Most code of ethics are directed towards an undefined client or public base, and it may be in the public's interest to establish certain standards that are expected of a particular profession. Codes cannot be considered definitive and do not usually include enforcement procedures. Police may find that their codes do not respond adequately to the situational demands that are placed on them. When it comes to police compliance with ethical codes, the standard of conduct incorporated in these codes of ethics are directed at each individual officer, and each must decide on their own level of compliance. Compliance may become a question of character, and officers may be admonished to do the right thing even when no one is watching. Ethical training and knowledge is essential for law enforcement in light of the complexities of policing and the legal liability issues that arise when police behave improperly and/or violate the public's trust. Ethical training gained traction in the 1990s when the IACP recommended providing ethical instruction for all ranks throughout an officer's career. This included incorporating decision-making models in the instruction, discussing values, and developing critical thinking exercise and using adult learning models. A 2022 study of 33 curriculums for police training institutions found that on average, ethical courses constitute only 8.14 hours, or approximately 1.27% of the entire basic training program. In terms of actual course conduct, all curriculum exhibited a low road approach or a low road to a high road approach, with no curriculum being developed as a wholly high road approach. A low road approach can be characterized as a quote-unquote stay out of trouble perspective, whereas a high road approach promotes quote-unquote doing the right thing. Police leaders now face considerable challenges, including public disquiet over police use of force and the policing in Black communities. Ethical leadership has been explained as the demonstration of a normatively approach that is conducted through personal actions and interpersonal relationships and is to promote such conduct to follow through two-way communication, reinforcement, and decision-making. The College of Policing in England has recognized an association between ethical behaviors and ethical decision-making. The most significant level of leadership in police agencies is likely to be at the middle level, where important operational and personnel decisions are made rather than at the level of the police chief. Ethical leadership means basing decisions on the evidence available. We then look at the nature of police occupational stress. Occupational tensions within policing arise from officer perceptions that their organization is unpredictable and punitive rather than democratic and fair. And because officers feel at risk from the internal mechanisms of politics, supervision, and policies, they are uncertain of events or incidents. Workplace problems are important stressors that include the following factors: an unsatisfactory interaction with fellow officers, concern about status or opportunities for them to advance within the department, bias and harassment, and an over or underestimation of police capabilities. Some stress is a form of lack of support from networks, both at home and at work. Organizational-based stress can undermine law enforcement effectiveness through health issues, poor morale, and high staff turnover rates. Occupational stressors and other critical policing incidents are most closely associated with police stress. In large departments, stressors may be associated with high levels of discipline and regulations, or a more proactive, even a militaristic approach to policing. In a smaller department, there may be less crime and more scope for community-type policing that will diminish this isolation of police from that local community. Police are going to face three different types of stress. They're going to be seeing explosive events, so crime and process, daily tensions that corrode confidence and resiliency, and also implosive events that chain an officer's values and bring about internal conflicts. Policing also means adapting to change, which can in itself be a stressor. Dealing with stress is incredibly important. It has been suggested that police culture itself develop a way that police officers are able to cope with the pressures and the tension within their police work. Types of treatment and prevention programs from police range from psychological counseling to Alcoholics Anonymous to train about stress at academics. Generally, individual coping strategies include the following: access to a dependable support system, both in and out of the department. Improved communication skills to better articulate individual concerns. A regular exercise program and a good diet. Recreational activities that allow an individual to turn off or shut off from work. Participating in self-help groups or regular vacation. Departments can help officers to minimize or avoid stress in several different ways. Through organizational practices and mechanisms that teach officers about stress and how to cope with it, by having an open channel of communication to supportive supervisors who understand how to recognize and to respond to their stressed officers, and by having debriefing sessions at the end of their shifts. Since 1776, the U.S. has sought to isolate the military from involvement in civilian affairs, citing the quartering of British troops in colonial Boston in the late 18th century as a show of power over a dissident population. A rule prohibiting military involvement in domestic law enforcement was adopted in the Posse Comitatus Act (PCA) of 1878. In World War I, the PCA was suspended, enabling the military to be used in aiding the police of domestic unrest and by the National Guard who could be deployed overseas. In 1981, the PCA was substantially weakened when it was amended to allow the military to participate in the war on drugs. Events in the town of Ferguson, Missouri, raised the profile of militarized policing, and soon after, the U.S. Senator reacted to public concerns by debating and holding hearings about federal programs that allowed police departments to obtain military assets at no cost. The general approach of the Senate was that this kind of equipment and its deployment as part of police tactics brought about mistrust between the police and the community that they were supposed to be protecting and serving. Supporting points for this argument of the convergence of the police and the military include the weakening of law preventing military involvement in law enforcement, the creation of cooperation between the police and the military, the growth and routine use of SWAT units, which modeled on military units, a growing tendency for police to rely on war or military models in designing crime, drug, or terrorism control and operations, and constructing crime as insurgency and the crime control as low-intensity conflict, which requires for the performance of counterinsurgent measures by police and the military. Militarization means adopting and applying the central elements of the military model and is represented in policing by police drawing on and patterning themselves in the tenets of the militarization and the military model. One argument explaining the increased deployment of SWAT units is that it represents strong evidence that the U.S. police and the war on crime in general have moved significantly down the militarization continuum. As alternative views in this frequent development of SWAT units was a reaction to the new demands placed on policing by the war on drugs, the ACLU concluded that the use of SWAT teams to serve search warrants is inappropriate because officer safety did not appear to be a genuine threat. It argues SWAT units should not be deployed based solely on a probable cause of the presence of drugs, and that a warrant service is appropriate only if it can be demonstrated that the regular police could not execute a warrant without facing an immediate threat of serious bodily injury. The ACLU also noted that reasonable standards for deploying SWAT teams appear to be virtually non-existent. In terms of the targets of SWAT raids, the ACLU found that the use of a paramilitary weapon and tactics primarily affected people of color. Commentators point to two government strategies as key in the growth of militarization: the war on drugs and the war on terror. These metaphoric wars are argued to have shaped our policies for policing throughout the use of these militaristic rhetoric. The war on drugs was declared by President Nixon in the 1970s and was conducted by DEA and local law enforcement agencies with military assistance and great publicity. Some scholars have argued that the cause of militarization in policing remained contested. They also argue that the war on terror was not a cause, but rather an excuse for the military to be deployed, and that policing has become militarized worldwide because of the implication of the threats of our national security. Indirect militarization occurs when police departments, as bureaucracies, engage in mission creep to extend their activities and increase their spending. Actual or perceived crises, as well as moral panics that are fear-based and associated with forms of crime or terrorism, give the government the opportunity to expand its activities by formulating new programs. Some examples of how SWAT tactics have been employed inappropriately or recklessly, resulting in some adverse outcomes, are listed here. In 2014, the U.S. 11th Circuit ruled in Berry v. Leslie that using SWAT tactics to conduct a regulatory raid on Orlando, Florida barbershops was a violation of the Fourth Amendment. Next example. In St. Louis County, Missouri, the location of the town of Ferguson, police have determined that they will use SWAT teams to serve all of their felony warrants. Next example. In 2012, a police chief in Arkansas announced that he would bring in a policy that SWAT officers would patrol the streets of a small town he policed and stop all pedestrians, requiring identification and an explanation of why they were walking down the street. Next example. In Detroit, a 7-year-old girl was shot in the head and killed by a SWAT team member who entered her home in search of a suspect who lived in another unit of the duplex owned by that girl's family. The team had been warned before the raid that there were children within the home. Next example. In Cornelia, Georgia, a SWAT team executed a no-knock warrant on a suspected drug dealer through a flashbang grenade prior to entering his home. It landed in the crib of a small child who was severely burned. Final example. Today, police militarization has reached university police departments and schools. At least 2 university law enforcement units have obtained grenade launchers from federal sources, and the Ohio State University Police Unit has a mine-resistant ambush-protected MRAP vehicle to provide a presence on football game days. It has been argued that SWAT teams produce fear and outrage within communities, but there is a lack of evidence to support this assertion. Some argue that SWAT teams may well have their own culture, but it remains a police and not a warrior culture because SWAT teams' values are shared by most police officers. While military are trained to use lethal force indiscriminately, police may target specific individuals only for good reason, and their discretion to use force and violence is limited and is circumscribed by rules and institutional practices. Some argue it cannot be said that police have adopted a military culture or posture, that their training and their missions are completely different. In the United States, officer safety appears to be the primary justification for the expansion and the development of our SWAT teams, but no studies have analyzed police rationale. Through this, we see a minimized risk that seems to be the central issue with the reason for SWAT unit deployment. From a state violence and fear of crime versus police culture, several levels of analysis can be applied to this issue of police militarization. One level situates the research and analysis of militarization under a wide discourse of increased state violence, fear of crime, or a fear of terrorism. Another level might regard SWAT teams as embodying one of the core elements of police culture, namely that the police are risk makers. The influence of police militarization have now extended beyond paramilitary SWAT units and into our street-level policing. Police corruption and the nature of police corruption. Kickbacks. So kickbacks are including goods, services, or money that is received for various services. These have been condoned within police culture as long as rewards are modest and the business is legitimate. Opportunistic threat. There are a number of forms that include stealing property from those arrested, those involved in a traffic accident, or other victims. This could include stealing money or goods that were left behind by a burglar when investigating said burglary. This could also be removing items from an unprotected property site or stealing parts of confiscated evidence. We also look at shakedowns. Shakedowns, this is understood to include accepting payments for not making an arrest or for issuing a summons that ordinarily would have been issued. A shakedown may be protected by police code of silence, but if revealed, they are usually strongly condemned by police supervisor. Protection of illegal acts. Police may provide many forms of protection to those who are involved or engaged in illegal enterprises so that they may operate with minimal official harassment. Examples of this could be payments to police by cab companies to park illegally and to operate cabs in breach of standard safety processes. Payment by trucking firms to haul overloaded cargo. Payment by construction companies to overlook a violation or a regulation. The traffic fix. This involves taking money or other rewards for disposal of a traffic citation. The misdemeanor fix. Here, a police officer will quash proceedings for a misdemeanor by, for example, not processing or proceeding with prosecution. They may tamper with evidence or they may perjure themselves in a procedure. A felony fix. This is the same as a misdemeanor fix, except a felony is going to be involved versus a misdemeanor charge. We then look at direct criminal activities. So these occur when officers commit criminal acts for personal gains as if they themselves are the criminal. Internal payoffs. There are various forms of internal corruptions in which police officers may buy, barter, or sell aspects of their employment. Officers who administer assignments may receive rewards for assigning officers to particular divisions or for providing transfers to or from specific or preferred assignments. The corruption of authority. This involves authorization and unearned benefits that officers are given by virtue of their employment as the police officer. This could include a free meal, liquor, sex, entertainment, discount on purchases, payment for property protection that extends beyond normal police duty, secret payments by property owners to arrest robbers and burglars at their place of business, and payment by bondsmen to police for the arrest and notification of those who have jumped bail, where a bondsman is acting as a bounty hunter. It is a common practice for restaurants to offer police free or half-price meal or even a free coffee. This raises the issue of the expectation of those businesses in giving these benefits. Accepting gratuities. Under certain circumstances, some argue that police should be encouraged to accept gratuities because most people are expressing a debt to police for their service. Only in situations in which the provider of the gratuity was seeking to establish credit for future use for such transactions would this be considered problematic. Another argument is that police should refuse gratuities that could, in the public mind, be regarded as influencing their judgment in the conduct of their duty. Accepting a gratuity may well have an effect on how police conduct themselves, even if they fail to appreciate that fact. Linking gratuity to distributive justice, it can be argued that the effect of a gratuity is to induce a police officer to distribute the benefit of their presence disproportionately to some taxpayers than to others. What policies should police departments follow concerning this issue and accepting gratuity? Many departments strictly prohibit any acceptance, but because police officers are often out of direct supervision, enforcing this policy could be very problematic. Some departments have attempted to regulate gratuities by imposing a policy that limits the amount of gratuity on the basis that the value of the gratuity is related to the level of corruption. The explanation of police corruption may be personalistic, institutional, or systematic. Others have identified this as a slippery slope that can lead to corruption. We also look at noble cause corruption that involves justifying corruption or bending the rules as legitimate acts in the service of the noble cause of policing. Corruptors gain influence over the police, subverting police from their proper role and creating conditions that favor crime. Corruption undermines public trust in the police force and diminishes credibility in the integrity of the individual police officer. Three explanations emphasize that individual police officers as the ultimate cause of corruption: the rotten apple, the recruitment perspective, and the police personality explanation. In the rotten apple explanation, corruption is described as merely the acts of a few rotten apples in an otherwise honest or good department. The recruitment perspective argues personality traits shared by officers recruited from similar social backgrounds may make them more susceptible to corruption. The police personality argument asserts that the institutional police culture creates an environment that encourages or fails to discourage police corruption. Another contributor to corruption is an officer's personal lack of competency. The wide discretionary powers that police officers enjoy, as well as the difficulties in supervising that discretion, are aspects of policing as an institution, and it is argued that police discretion makes corruption more likely to occur. Police discretion can be used for illegitimate purposes, and it gives the police officer scope to hide unethical decisions. Two factors that may bear on corruption from the institutional viewpoint are the low public visibility of police and the issue of secrecy within an institution. The public has little knowledge or sense of what police officers do, and much police activity is shielded from the public. This low visibility can provide opportunities for corruption. In terms of secrecy, it is argued that a person may likely be observing corruption firsthand in another police officer. Frequently, however, there is not a relevant version of this corruption to anyone due to the fear of retaliation, bonds of friendship, loyalty, or an institutional ideology that sets police against the public in a isolationistic approach. So this is a so-called blue wall of science that is sometimes referred to as a code of silence that is found in other nations as well as among our U.S. police forces. The major factor within the managerial secrecy suggests that in a supervisor position, those who were formerly police officers or patrol officers and have now risen through the ranks share this value and culture that includes the values that ensure that corruption is to remain hidden. This explanation looks at pressures placed on police by society that might provoke police corruption and suggests that police corruption is rooted within police interactions within a society rather than within the individual police officer. From the police point of view, violations of vice laws often constitute victimless crimes, which provides further encouragement towards their corruption. In developing countries, low police salaries operate as a contributing factor towards police corruption. The slippery slope explanation is an important explanation for police corruption in the term of the slippery slope. This suggests that taking rewards or money begins on a small scale and is tactically acknowledged by other police officers. Then officers become accustomed to taking these small rewards and will eventually develop connections to other officers involved in corruption on a grander scale. Officers then become desensitized to the moral implication of their acts, and the acts themselves become addictive. Police officers may find themselves on this slope from social considerations that bind police together and take on the way of police perspectives on their own behavior. One solution is to decriminalize activities that most easily tempt a police officer into grafting. Others claim officers can make a distinction between accepting a minor perk versus a bribe because this is intended to affect the performance of their duties. Noble cause corruption is an alternative slippery slope model that describes the process of noble cause corruption rather than a simple economic corruption. This slope begins with encouragement to accept free meals to establish whether an officer's loyalty to others in the squad can be relied on. This is followed by loyalty backup, where the officer is tested for their own willingness to back up their other officers. The next stage is using physical violence against citizen, involving greater risk to the officer of detection, risk of injury, or retaliation. Flaking drugs is a much more serious form of noble cause corruption in which police officers will plant drugs to enhance the seriousness of a crime, so potentially taking it from a simple misdemeanor to a felony or even a higher level. Some argue that the idea of a noble cause represents a value imported into police work from a broader American life. The police reflect a particular cultural value by incorporating a concern for the victim and a notion that no one should stand above the law. Others argue that aspects of police culture and perceiving police as soldiers in the war on crime will shape the worldwide view of an individual police officers on the street. Police may place personal morality above the law and act as if they are the law. When corruption is justified by a noble cause, officers who carry out acts of misconduct are perceived to be dealing with the crime effectively and efficiently. Another more sympathetic explanation for police corruption suggests that corruption is produced by the pressures society has imposed on law enforcement. Police are expected to enforce the law, but they are also expected to obey regulations about how they obtain information and how they gather their evidence. They are also expected to enforce personal morality while respecting constitutional rights to privacy and also due process. This argument sanctions a level of police corruption and leaves open the question of the extent of the law. We then look at drugs and corruption. Some argue that police operate in an environment in which there is widespread use of illegal drugs and a vast amount of drug money. Circumstances of enforcing anti-drug laws can be described as the following. There exists a large amount of money and a willingness on the part of the drug users and dealers to bribe the police. 2. There is no complainants because the victims, quote unquote, are not likely to report that they have been the victim of a criminal act. 3. In light of this victimless crime, bribes can be accepted and drugs or drug money stolen with relative inaction. 4. Sections of the public see drug addiction as a medical condition rather than a crime and see corruption as being less morally damning. 5. Young police officers may share their peers' attitudes whose regard to the use and sale of illegal drugs as being considered a minor matter. Police working in a drug investigation may turn a blind eye to drugs or take drugs themselves, which will enter them into the spiral of corruption. According to a 1998 government report, 1/2 of all police officers convicted following an FBI-led investigation into corruption cases between 1993 and 1997 were convicted of drug-related offenses. In the United Kingdom, a notorious example of the linkage between police corruption and drug dealing occurred in the early 1990s. It highlighted the temptations of drug dealing as a source of corruption, benefits for police, as well as the dangers of consorting with informants without following police policies and procedures. Corruption may be reduced through examining 4 basic aspects of policing. First, recruitment. Only those with the highest moral character should be recruited into policing because the incompetent might easily become disaffected and open to their corruption. 2. Reducing the opportunities for corruption. The legislative bodies and other policies have provided decriminalization, and this will reduce the opportunities for corruption. 3. Detecting and deterring corruption. Detecting and deterrence are achieved through accountability, internal or external, and through tools such as investigative, auditing, surveillance, and through the use of informants. And 4. Reinforcing the motivation to act morally. Various police forces have established professional standard units whose task is to proactively cultivate and analyze information or intelligence on unethical police practices from a range of sources and mount formal investigations. These units are divided into an intelligence cell and an operational team, with the intelligence cell staffed by the analysts tasked to manage a central database of information that is relevant to anti-corruption efforts. Operational teams then conduct formal investigations into these individuals. The passing of sensitive information from police sources to those outside of the force is a significant form of corruption within the United Kingdom. Motivating police to do what is morally correct ought to reduce the temptations for corruption. Providing a just system of rewards and penalties within the police organization, rejecting systems of promotion that are unjust, and addressing police complaints about unfair workloads may motivate police to resist inducements into legality. The publication and dissemination of ethical standards and an emphasis on the ethical ends of policing can contribute to the development of proper motivation. Emphasis on collective responsibilities of police to control corruption can change an attitude that only isolates individuals who whistleblow and reveal corruption. Most police departments employ a wide variety of mechanisms that involve the community to provide oversight and accountability. Arguments in favor of citizen review include the following. It is likely to result in more objective and thorough investigations. It is likely to deter police misconduct as it leads to a greater role of conviction because police are less likely to conceal wrongdoing. And individual complainants and the public will have a higher level of confidence in the integrity of police practices. Citizen oversight of police began in the 1920s and has steadily grown despite consistent police resistance to the notion outsiders should judge their conduct. President Obama's task force on the 21st century policing recommended some form of civilian oversight to law enforcement, as this is important in order to strengthen the trust within our community. Every community should define the appropriate form and structure of civilian oversight and to meet the needs of the community. There are challenges in determining the scope of the operation of the oversight bodies and how they are going to evaluate the work. Accountability refers to holding law enforcement agencies accountable for services like crime control and to the accountability of individual officers for the treatment they offer to the public and in their use of force and discrimination. Ensuring police accountability involves setting up complex administrative arrangements, some introduced from court proceedings and settlements that are secured by the Department of Justice, and a mandate that ensure police accountability. The 1994 Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act authorizes the Department of Justice to seek injunctions against policing agencies whose policy or practice violate federal law or efficiently deprive persons of their constitutional rights. The GOJ begins with an investigation into complaints involving site visits, documented inspection, and interviews with the stakeholders. These investigations generate findings letters, which give insight into how the Department of Justice constructs policing problems and solutions. The Department of Justice makes use of the consent decrees. These decrees are monitored to ensure results and generally require improved civilian complaints, investigations, and disciplinary mechanics. Two elements in the new police accountability are specific strategies that are intended to enhance accountability and a framework that brings strategies and tools together into a program of policing. Best practices within policing have focused on strategies such as reporting the use of force and other critical incidents, maintaining open, accessible citizen complaint procedures, establishing an early intervention system that systematically collects and analyzes data on police performance for early identification of issuing need corrections, and then external citizen overview. The conceptual framework these strategies operate is comprised of moving police organizations away from an emphasis on the rotten apple theory and in the direction of an actual organizational change that addresses organizational and management issues that are related to police conduct. controlling street-level officers' behavior through devices such as use of force reporting systems, systematic collection and analysis of data to develop a fact-based depiction of an officer's activity. This could include using a program similar to CompStat that collects and analyzes data on crime patterns, and a conversion of internal or external accountability so that these are seen as interrelated and not as alternatives. The police audit office is likely to be more efficient as a form of an oversight than a civilian review board because of the auditor's focus on organizational change. The auditor scrutinizes organizational problems that generate incidents. 5 functional police auditors perform auditing the department's citizen complaint process, auditing the police operation, conducting policy overview, community overreach, and creating transparency. External citizen review takes a number of forms. Many lack full independence because police officers, rather than citizens, conduct the initial fact-finding investigation. Some have no role in the investigation of individual complaints, while others are empowered to review police policies. A multi-member board conducts most review procedures, but a few comprise administrative agencies headed by an executive board. Boards may range in the size from 3 to 24, with an average of 10 members, and some include police representatives. The review body directly involves all elements of the community, emphasizing racial and ethnic minorities in the review process. The procedures adopted by the Citizen Review Body center on 4 processes: independent investigation power, the power to issue subpoenas, public hearings, and legal representation. These produce a critical trial model for complaint investigations. The alternative is an administrative investigative model that is close to the public and closely resembles an organization's personnel procedures. Citizen review bodies can impose discipline on police in only a few cases, and most may only make recommendations to the head of a police department. If the criminal trial model is considered inappropriate, other possibilities are the administrative process, which is most natural in nature, and forms of mediation that are provided in about 19% of review body cases. From a comparative perspective, in many countries, police accountability is lacking because the administrative response to police wrongdoings is deficient. In Argentina, Ecuador, and Paraguay, police fabricate or destroy evidence for disciplinary proceedings. In these countries, police forces tend to be militarized, and the police culture reflects an attitude of isolation and anonymity towards citizens. A crime control approach based on the notion of combat has produced torture and extrajudicial violence. In Canada, media focus on wrongdoings by their provincial police departments result in public inquiries that generate a demand for effective policing accountability. An Australian study on police accountability suggests that several criteria is needed to be satisfied to establish a viable citizen oversight into policing. This must include a capacity to conduct an independent investigation, direct access to the legislature in the form of regular reporting, an independent resource base so that the government cannot thwart efforts to ensure accountability, political and moral support to the oversight body, and links between government and the oversight body. Decentralization of citizen oversight body operations to capture all valid complaints rather than being isolated in just 1 to 2 large cities. Police anti-corruption measures in Australia have been classified in terms of 3 models: the minimalist, the intermediate, and the advanced. The minimalist model gives primary responsibility to the internal police disciplinary mechanisms. The intermediate model adopts the establishment of Internal Affairs Department as the key to a more aggressive anti-corruption approach. In the advanced model, there is a recognition that police misconduct can take multiple forms. In Latin America, accountability for wrongdoing is exceptionally deficient, with police accountability structures lacking resources and constrained by corruption. There are 2 general types of whistleblowing that has been identified: internal and external. Internal is reported misconduct to another person within the organization who is in turn may take corrective action. On external sides, this is exposed abuse to an outside agent. Within police departments, whistleblowing is often defined as involving any report outside an immediate circle of officers. It may have been to pay for a heavy price for the whistleblowing, and someone may be dismantled, demoted, or ostracized, or potentially even assaulted, or their families threatened because they have violated an organizational loyalty. Some argue that whistleblowers should be offered protections and suggest they remain anonymous, and legislation should be enacted to protect them from harassment and discrimination. Moral justification may exist in the following conditions that have been satisfied. It is done in good faith to expose wrongdoing, violating human rights, causing harm to third parties, or violating the organization's purpose. Except in specific circumstances, the whistleblower has exhausted all of their internal avenues before going to the public. The whistleblower has ensured that there is proper evidence basis for their allegation of misconduct. The whistleblower has carefully analyzed the seriousness of the misconduct and its immediacy and its definition. The action of the whistleblower is consistent with the general responsibilities of a citizen to avoid or expose moral violations. It has some chance of success because if it is unsuccessful, or it is unlikely to accomplish any significant change, the act of whistleblowing lacks credibility. Studies have shown evidence of prejudicial attitudes and the regular use of racist language among officers. A study comparing Denver police officers and the public's attitude found police officers were only slightly more prejudiced than the community as a whole. The director of the FBI stated police officers working in black neighborhoods with a high crime rate developed a cynicism that shaded their attitudes about race. Racial profiling uses racial characteristics as indicators of criminal activity. The tendency to stereotype people may be an intrinsic approach of police work because officers are trained to be suspicious and to search for criminal activity. They develop a perceptual shorthand, and they believe this allows them to pick out suspects among the general population. In one study, young, low-income ethnic males were more likely to be stopped and questioned by police, and minorities were more likely to be arrested, but this might be due to factors such as perceived disrespect shown by the suspect towards law enforcement. Racial profiling has become a source of major concern to the Black community, particularly in light of the Rodney King incident and others, where police have alleged that there was a use of force or to have racial profiling against Black citizens. Driving while black or brown is stopping a disproportionate number of minority citizens for driving infractions is so pervasive that it has been termed the crime driving while black or brown. Racial profiling is less likely to be a factor in routine speeding stops. One analysis of police stops of drivers in Kansas City has shown how it is necessary to differentiate between investigative stop and traffic safety stops. The investigatory stop is where the intent is not to sanction a driving violation but to look for evidence of a more serious criminal wrongdoing. In 1996, the U.S. Supreme Court in Wren versus the United States ruled that investigatory stops did not violate the Fourth Amendment or other protections. In traffic stops, police are focused on violations of traffic laws and therefore target safety violators, both black or white. Investigatory stops raise questions of police legitimacy, professionalism, and racial bias, and arguably constitute a form of racial subordination. Police may act on their stereotypical image of a suspicious conduct by stopping, questioning, or frisking people on the street. This is where stop and frisk comes from. These laws permit police to carry out brief detentions for investigatory purposes, stops, and to pat down those who are stopped for weapons, frisk. The legal basis was provided by the U.S. Supreme Court in Terry versus Ohio. A police officer need only have reasonable, articulable suspicion of a criminal activity and the dangerousness to stop and frisk. In cities with the extensive employment, stop and frisk was overused, which violated citizens' rights and impacted police and community relations. This caused citizens to experience physical, psychological, and emotional consequences. Race and ethnicity play a major part in shaping public's attitude towards police. Police tend to be negatively evaluated by residents in high crime neighborhoods and by those who fear the incident of crime in their neighborhood, especially when they're using aggressive policing techniques that are designed for zero tolerance policing, which has resulted in the disproportionate arrest rates for Black individuals. Police selective in enforcing laws may discriminate against a certain group of people. Police treatment of domestic violence cases have historically involved a pattern of non-interference based on assumptions such violence was not a proper subject of crime control unless it involved an injury that could be defined as a felony assault. Women battered by their partners received discriminatory treatment by police, whether this was because of action taken against the batterer, dependent on whether the crime was considered to be a felony or a misdemeanor. There was also selective enforcement by the police that can offer less protection to rape victims because most rape victims are victimized by known intimates, and police enforcement practices focus on stranger rape.